I want you to just imagine for a second that you're sitting at your kitchen table.
Okay, painting a picture here.
Yeah, exactly. So you've got this steaming, incredibly fragrant bowl of curry right in front of you.
It sounds pretty good, actually.
Right. Well, a good friend of yours just sent you this brand new recipe that they've been, absolutely raving about.
Oh, the high-pressure recipe recommendation.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So you spent the last hour chopping, simmering, getting the plating just right. Your friend is waiting for your text, literally dying to know how it turned out.
The stakes are high.
They are.
Yeah.
So you take a big, enthusiastic spoonful, you put it in your mouth, and instantly, it's just a disaster.
Oh, no. We're talking, like, catastrophic levels of spice here.
Full-on biological meltdown. Like your eyes are watering, you are sweating profusely, your mouth is quite literally on fire.
Wow.
Yeah, you're scrambling for a glass of milk, gasping for air, and as you are chugging this milk, trying to, just regain your vision, you look back down at the recipe on your phone.
Let me guess. A measurement issue.
Bingo. There it is. The fatal error. The typo. The recipe called for 2 tablespoons of chili powder instead of 2 teaspoons.
Oh, wow. Which, completely alters the chemical composition of the dish.
Right.
It's essentially a weaponized curry at that point.
A bowl of hot lava. So here is the question for you, the listener. How do you handle this? Your phone buzzes. It's your friend. They're texting, "How was it?"
Yeah, that's a tough one.
How do you tell them that their precious, highly recommended recipe nearly sent you to the emergency room without completely ruining the friendship?
It's such a tricky spot because it's an incredibly high-stakes moment for what is, a seemingly low-stakes situation.
Yeah.
You have 2 entirely competing drives happening at once. You've got the utilitarian drive, to be honest, right? To save them from burning their own esophagus next time.
Right, the practical side.
Exactly. But then you have the social drive to protect their feelings and, preserve your bond.
And this exact scenario, it actually happened to someone in the source material we are diving into today.
Right. The woman named Emma.
Yes, Emma. She cooked this weaponized curry from her friend John's recipe. And her response is just, well, it's fascinating. She starts off with a glowing positive. She texts back, well, it was incredibly flavorful.
Which, to be fair, is technically true. Chili powder certainly doesn't lack flavor.
Totally true. She validates the underlying good intention of the recipe first. But then she smoothly transitions. She says, but if I could offer a little constructive criticism, I think the recipe might have a typo. It called for 2 tablespoons of chili powder, and my mouth is still recovering this morning.
It's brilliant. The crisis is completely averted.
Yeah, John realizes the mistake, he apologizes, and nobody's ego is bruised.
He actually points out later that she managed to give him feedback in a way that felt like a lifeline rather than a slap in the face.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because Emma's curry crisis perfectly demonstrates the core tension of human communication that we are exploring today. We all know constructive criticism is meant to be helpful, right? But the source data shows there is this massive, often insurmountable gap between our intention to help someone and how their nervous system actually processes our words.
Because we're terrified of sparking a defensive backlash.
Exactly. And that biological reality exists everywhere. It's not just about spicy food and text messages.
No, it's everywhere. It's in our homes, our friendships, and most profoundly, I think, in our workplaces.
Which is the entire focus of our deep dive today. We have this incredible stack of notes and transcripts from an advanced English communication guide.
A very detailed guide.
Super detailed. And it's entirely focused on the art of giving and receiving constructive feedback. So our goal for you today is to extract the exact vocabulary, the hidden psychological levers, and the structural frameworks you need to bypass that biological defense mechanism.
So no matter what setting you are in.
Right.
Because we really need to look past just the dictionary definition of feedback. We all understand the concept intellectually.
Sure, pointing out how to improve.
Right. But the sources highlight that when you deliver a critique, you aren't just passing neutral data from one brain to another.
You're navigating a minefield.
Exactly. A minefield of status, ego, and deeply ingrained survival instincts.
So let's test that theory against the most classic workplace dynamic, the top-down review. Because I think the gap between intent and reception is probably widest when there's a real power imbalance.
Oh, without a doubt.
The sources introduce us to this case study with a manager named Sarah, and she has to give feedback to a junior employee named Ben about his quarterly report.
Right, and the primary strategy Sarah uses here is something almost everyone has probably heard of. It's the sandwich method.
Okay, I have to stop you right there. The feedback sandwich.
Really?
I know.
I feel like that is such an outdated cliche management fad. Isn't that just like a cheap corporate manipulation tactic?
I completely understand the skepticism, honestly. It gets a bad rap. Like, if you were the employee sitting in that chair, your brain knows exactly what's happening. You hear the top layer of praise, like, great job on the data, and your internal alarm just starts ringing.
You're bracing for impact.
Yes. You're just waiting for the but. You tune out the compliment entirely because you know the bad news is coming. Doesn't that just breed cynicism?
What's fascinating here is why the source text still strongly advocates for this method. Despite the fact that, yes, it can feel structurally transparent.
So why do they defend it?
The text argues it is not about tricking the employee. It's actually about neurobiology and how the human brain processes a threat to its status.
A threat. But we're just talking about a spreadsheet here.
Well, to the conscious mind, yes, it's a spreadsheet. But to the amygdala, which is the part of the brain constantly scanning for danger, criticism from a superior is processed as a literal survival threat.
Wait, really? A survival threat?
Biologically speaking, yes. When someone in a hierarchical position of power over you says, "We need to talk about your work," your brain doesn't know the difference between a bad quarterly report and being exiled from the tribe.
Oh, wow.
Your cortisol spikes, you go into a literal fight-or-flight state.
So the body physically prepares for combat over like a formatting error.
Precisely. And when that cortisol floods the system, the prefrontal cortex shuts down.
And that's the logic center, right?
Exactly. The part responsible for logical thinking, absorbing new data, learning, it literally goes offline. If Sarah just walks in and starts delivering the raw, objective critique of the report, Ben's ego throws up a defensive wall.
So he just can't hear it.
He literally cannot process the information she is giving him because his brain is too busy defending his identity.
Okay, so how does the praise at the beginning change that biological response? If Ben knows it's a sandwich, why does it actually work?
Because the praise acts as an ego anchor. Let's look at Sarah's exact words in the transcript. Ben walks in, looking anxious. Sarah says, "First of all, I want to say you did a fantastic job gathering all that data. The depth of the research is really impressive, and it's clear you put a lot of hard work in."
Okay, so she goes heavy on the validation.
She does. And even if Ben suspects a critique is coming, those specific words of validation send a powerful, soothing signal to his nervous system. She is essentially saying, "You are safe here. I see your competence. Your position in the tribe is secure."
It lowers the cortisol.
Exactly. It relaxes the ego just enough to keep the prefrontal cortex online. It's like a surgeon applying an anesthetic before making an incision.
That's a great analogy.
You aren't tricking the patient into thinking there won't be a cut. You're just ensuring their body doesn't violently react and jump off the table when you try to heal them.
I see the logic now.
Yeah.
But it means the incision itself still has to be incredibly precise, right? Like, if she gives him the anesthetic but then uses the chainsaw for the critique, the sandwich falls apart anyway.
Which is exactly why the source guide focuses so heavily on the specific vocabulary of gentle correction. The transition from the praise to the critique is where most managers fail completely.
So how does Sarah do it?
Let's look at it. She doesn't use the word but. She smoothly pivots by saying, "There are just one or two areas where I see some room for improvement."
Room for improvement.
Yeah.
I've always found that phrase a bit, I don't know, overly sanitized, like corporate speak.
A lot of people feel that way.
Why not just be direct and say, there are a few problems with your report?
Because of the cognitive framing those words trigger. Think about the spatial metaphor of the word problem. If you are driving and someone says, "There's a problem ahead," what do you visualize?
I visualize a roadblock, like a crashed car, something solid that I've slammed into. The journey is halted.
Right. The judgment is absolute and it looks backward at a failure. But room for improvement is an architectural metaphor.
Oh, I see.
It implies an open, empty space. It suggests that the house Ben built is fundamentally sound, and there is simply an unfurnished room waiting to be filled with better work.
Wow, that is a wildly different emotional landscape.
It really is. It invites him to step into a space of potential, rather than defending himself against a roadblock.
You're shifting it from a collision to an expansion. But what happens when she actually has to point out this specific flaw? The guide highlights her next sentence. She says, "I've noticed that while the data is excellent, the main conclusions aren't always immediately clear."
Let's zero in on those first four words. I've noticed that. This is arguably one of the most vital psychological tools in the entire source guide.
Really?
Yes. It is a masterclass in non-confrontational framing.
See, I actually struggle with, I've noticed that. To me, it can almost sound passive-aggressive. Like you're tiptoeing around the issue instead of just saying what's wrong. Why does the guide argue this is so effective?
Well, let's play out the alternative. What happens if Sarah takes the direct, objective route? What if she just says, Ben, your summary is dense and confusing?
Well, Ben would probably get defensive immediately. He'd likely say, no, it isn't. All the facts are right there on page 1.
And suddenly, you are in a debate.
Right.
By saying, your summary is dense, Sarah has made an objective claim about the document's reality. She has stated it as a universal fact. And if Ben's reality doesn't match hers, his only recourse is to argue the facts.
He literally has to prove her wrong to protect his competence.
Exactly. But by saying, I've noticed that the main conclusions aren't immediately clear, Sarah completely bypasses the debate.
Because it's subjective.
Yes, she is no longer making an objective claim about the document. She is reporting on her own internal subjective experience of interacting with his work. She is essentially saying, when my brain read these words, my experience was a lack of clarity.
Oh, wow. I get it. Ben can't argue with her internal experience. He can't say, no, you didn't experience confusion.
Exactly. It takes the target off of Ben's identity and places it entirely on the interaction between Sarah and the text. It removes all the friction.
It's the difference between telling a roommate, you are a slob, versus, I've noticed that the dishes are piling up in the sink.
Perfect example. One is an attack on character that demands a defense. The other is just a neutral observation of a shared environment.
That's like a meteorologist reporting the weather. They don't get angry at the clouds. They just say, I've noticed a low pressure system moving in. It drains all the emotional heat out of the observation.
It really does.
But you can't just leave him with an observation, right? If she just says, I notice it's confusing, and walks out, Ben is just standing there with a dense report feeling terrible.
Which brings us to the crucial third step of the top-down dynamic, pivoting to solutions.
Okay.
The source guide is absolutely adamant that delivering an observation without a clear path forward is functionally identical to complaining.
That makes sense. So what's the pivot?
Sarah uses a very specific transition here. She says, moving forward.
Moving forward. Again, a phrase that borders on corporate jargon for me. Does it really do that much heavy lifting?
Think about the physics of that phrase. It acts as a directional signpost. When you discuss a mistake, you are inherently looking backward at an event that cannot be changed.
Right. The report is already written.
And lingering in the past only generates shame. But moving forward physically reorients the conversation. It turns both of their heads to look at the future. Sarah says, moving forward, maybe try starting with the 3 most important findings and then build the summary around them.
So she hands him a blueprint for the next iteration.
Yes. It proves to Ben's nervous system that the entire interaction, the sandwich, the gentle phrasing, the subjective observation, it was purely about his growth, not his punishment.
Because you cannot punish someone moving forward.
Precisely. You can only coach them. By offering a specific, actionable solution for the future, she solidifies her role as a mentor.
Okay, so we just saw how Sarah used the safety of her managerial authority to frame that feedback. The power dynamic allowed her to be the coach handing down the blueprint. But that entire strategy completely collapses if you try it on someone who doesn't report to you, doesn't it?
Oh, it falls apart instantly.
Like if Maya from our second scenario in the sources tries to sandwich her equal, David. If she says, moving forward, I need you to do this, it's going to sound incredibly patronizing.
It would cause immediate, intense resentment. Because you are assuming a structural authority that you simply do not possess.
Right.
The dynamic shifts entirely when you are dealing with peer-to-peer horizontal feedback. The language has to pivot away from directive coaching and move toward collaborative problem solving.
So how does Maya handle it? The sources say she and David are equals.
Right.
And they're preparing a joint slide deck.
Correct. David shares his first draft.
And Maya likes it, but she wants to completely change the opening template and expand the goals section. So she has critiques, but no authority to demand those changes.
The psychological bedrock of Maya's approach here is the transition from I language to we language.
We.
She still starts with genuine validation. She says, wow, you've put a lot of work into this. The data visualizations are really clear. But notice what she doesn't do.
What's that?
She doesn't say, I see room for improvement. She doesn't say, I've noticed that.
Because that's the language of an evaluator. Someone judging from above.
Exactly. Instead, she makes David a partner in the evaluation. When she suggests the new image, she asks, what if we tried a more dynamic image?
I love this shift. It reminds me of the difference between grading a test and co-piloting an airplane.
That's a really great way to look at it.
Yeah, like top-down feedback is sitting across a desk with a red pen, marking up their work. But horizontal feedback is like sitting next to them in the cockpit, looking out the same window at the same horizon and saying, hey, should we steer the plane slightly to the left?
The shared horizon is the perfect metaphor. You are sharing the controls of the project, and the vocabulary Maya uses reflects that shared control.
What are the specific phrases the guide points out?
It pulls out 2 specific phrases she uses to introduce her critique. She says, I was just wondering if, and what if we tried?
I have to admit, I was just wondering if sounds almost timid to me. It sounds like she lacks confidence in her own idea.
It can definitely read that way on paper, but in practice, it is highly strategic.
How so?
By introducing her suggestion as a question, she is explicitly inviting David's intellect into the process. She is not dictating a change, she is proposing a hypothesis. What if we tried a more dynamic image, maybe a picture of the team? She frames it as an experiment.
And the beauty of an experiment is that it removes the ego from the idea completely, doesn't it?
Precisely. If she says, we need to use a team picture, and David hates it, now they are in a conflict. Her ego is attached to the command, and his ego is attached to resisting it.
Right, the clash.
But if she says, what if we tried it? She's just taking the idea and placing it gently on the table between them. They can both poke at it, evaluate it, and if it fails the experiment, they just throw it away.
Neither person loses face because it was just a trial balloon.
Exactly.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting for me. The guide highlights this tiny 3-word phrase Maya uses when she wants to tell David that his section on future goals is too short. She precedes her critique with, just a thought.
Yes.
I use this all the time, actually, but I've never stopped to analyze the mechanics of why it works so well.
Just a thought is arguably the ultimate pressure release valve in the English language. When Maya says just a thought, but the section on future goals feels a little brief, she is actively, intentionally lowering the stakes of her own opinion.
She is essentially telling David, here is a low-pressure idea. I am offering it to you, but you have my explicit permission to ignore it without offending me.
It leverages something called reactance theory in psychology. Have you heard of it?
I don't think so. What is that?
Well, human beings have a deeply ingrained need for autonomy. When we feel forced to adopt an opinion or make a change, our instinct is to push back, to react, simply to assert our freedom, even if the idea is objectively good.
Oh, like when someone tells you to calm down and makes you instantly furious.
Exactly that. Just a thought bypasses that reactance entirely because it preserves David's autonomy. It tells him he is still in control. And ironically, by giving him the freedom to reject the idea, he is far more likely to lean in and actually consider it.
Because the threat level is 0. It's brilliant.
It really is.
And she continues this additive approach when she actually suggests the fix. She wants to add a timeline to the goals section, but she anchors it to his work first.
Right.
She says, I love the points you made. To build on that idea, perhaps we could add a timeline.
To build on that idea, this validates David's original contribution perfectly. It signals to him, your foundation is solid. I am not trying to bulldoze your work and replace it with my own ego.
It is additive, not destructive.
Exactly. It takes his single-story house and simply adds a second floor.
It's the core principle of improv comedy, isn't it? The yes and rule.
Oh, absolutely.
Like you never block your partner's contribution by saying, no, but. You accept their premise and add your own flavor to it.
It's exactly that mechanism applied to corporate communication. It makes David feel like a vital co-creator of the final product.
Right.
And she brings it all home with a closer that absolutely seals the collaboration. After suggesting they draft up a timeline, she asks, how does that sound to you?
Giving the steering wheel right back to the co-pilot.
It refuses to let the conversation end on a directive. By asking that question, she forces the final decision to be a joint one. She isn't doing the project to him, they're doing it with each other.
Okay, so we've mapped out the psychology of serving the dish. We know how to carefully layer the sandwich as a boss, and we know how to use we language as a peer.
We do.
But this naturally leads us to the most difficult part of the source material. We know how to serve it, but what happens when someone serves it to us?
The ultimate test of professional maturity, receiving feedback.
Because let's be honest, giving feedback gracefully requires skill, sure. But receiving it without your brain screaming, you have no idea what you're talking about, that requires near superhuman emotional regulation.
It goes against every primal instinct we have.
It really does. And the source material puts our manager, Sarah, in the hot seat to demonstrate this. In the first scenario, she was the calm, collected boss dispensing the sandwich. Now, she is presenting a budget proposal to her director, Mr. Evans.
Right. The tables have turned.
And Mr. Evans spots a problem. Sarah has allocated a 5% contingency fund, which is like an emergency backup budget for a new software vendor. Mr. Evans thinks 5% is way too lean. He wants her to double it to 10%.
Now, let's pause and look at the trap that is laid out here, the trap of defensiveness.
Okay.
Because when Mr. Evans says 5% is too risky, Sarah's immediate visceral reaction is going to be self-preservation. Her competence is being questioned by an authority figure.
And I have to aggressively push back on behalf of Sarah here.
Go for it.
Because the text explicitly tells us that Sarah didn't just pull that 5% number out of thin air. She has hard data.
Sure.
She based it on the last 2 vendor projects, which both came in under budget. She has historical proof of her competence. If I am Sarah, I feel a professional obligation to defend my logic. Why shouldn't she fight for her position? Doesn't just rolling over make her look weak or unsure of her own analysis?
This raises an important question, and it strikes at the very heart of why receiving feedback feels so perilous. It feels like a courtroom trial where you are the defendant, right?
Exactly.
And if you don't present your evidence, you will be found guilty of incompetence. But look closely at the conversational mechanics. When you vigorously defend yourself in the face of feedback, what actually happens to the dynamic?
I suppose it turns into an argument.
It turns into a debate. And a debate has a winner and a loser. A debate is driven by ego. A debate is about proving who is right and who is wrong.
That's true.
But your main goal when receiving feedback from a superior is not to win a debate. Your goal is to absorb new data and demonstrate that you are focused on the ultimate success of the project, not the preservation of your own ego.
So defending yourself actually works against you.
Biologically, yes. The reality is that the moment you start formulating your defense, your brain literally stops listening to the critique.
That is a very tough reality to accept. I mean, every instinct tells you that if you don't explain your rationale, they will assume you are foolish.
I know, it's counterintuitive. But by actively suppressing that urge to debate, you actually signal a much higher level of competence.
Also,
Demonstrating a willingness to update your mental models in real time in the face of new information from a senior leader is the hallmark of a true professional. It shows you care more about the ship not sinking than you care about being the smartest person on the bridge.
I really like that. Okay, so how does Sarah navigate this without looking like she's just caving in? The guide highlights her specific vocabulary of graceful acceptance.
It does. The very first thing she says after Mr. Evans states his case for 10% is a masterstroke of emotional radiation. She doesn't cite her historical data. She just says, "Thank you for the feedback."
It sounds so incredibly basic, almost automatic, like a reflex. Does it actually do anything?
Its impact in a high-tension moment is massive. Saying thank you acts as a cognitive pattern interrupt.
A pattern interrupt.
Yes, for your own defensiveness and for the other person's expectation of resistance. It is biologically very difficult to sound angry or argumentative while sincerely expressing gratitude.
Yeah. It's like someone throws a punch, and instead of blocking it, you just bow. It completely absorbs the kinetic energy of the interaction.
That's a brilliant way to phrase it. It signals profound openness. You are explicitly treating their critique as a helpful gift, a contribution to your mutual success rather than a personal attack.
Yeah.
And then she follows it up by validating his stance. She says, "That's a very good point."
That's a very good point. She is telling her director, "I hear your logic, and I acknowledge its structural validity."
Wow.
She isn't just blindly submitting to his rank. She is intellectually aligning with his reasoning.
Exactly. And then comes a phrase that I believe requires an immense amount of inner security to pull off in a corporate environment.
What does she say?
She says, "To be honest, I hadn't considered the new vendor as a specific risk factor in that way."
I hadn't considered that. Just admitting a blind spot right to your boss's face. I feel like most people are terrified to say that.
Oh, absolutely terrified.
They think it translates to, "I am unprepared and I didn't do my job."
It takes immense confidence to admit a gap in your knowledge. But the reality is the exact opposite of what our anxiety tells us.
How does the boss perceive it?
By displaying this vulnerability, Sarah turns the criticism directly into a real-time learning opportunity. She proves to Mr. Evans that she has a growth mindset.
And that's the framework that believes intelligence can be developed, right?
Yes, through input from others. Senior leaders don't want employees who think their first draft is flawless. They want employees who can absorb environmental data and iterate rapidly.
You're right. It shifts her from looking defensive to looking highly adaptable. Now, the source guide's vocabulary section gave us another crucial tool for receiving feedback that Sarah didn't actually use in this specific scenario, but it feels incredibly important.
Which one is that?
What if the feedback isn't a clear mathematical shift from 5% to 10%? What if Mr. Evans had just said something frustratingly vague like, your budget feels a bit sloppy?
The vague critique. This is where most people lose their cool entirely.
Yeah.
The guide strongly recommends deploying the clarification tool. You ask, could you give me a specific example?
This is so vital because when someone hits you with vague criticism like you aren't communicating well or this strategy is weak, the immediate emotional response is usually, what are you talking about? Or, I don't do that.
Which instantly sounds aggressive.
Yeah, it sounds like a challenge to their authority, but asking, could you give me a specific example, is a completely non-defensive way to ground the conversation.
It assumes positive intent. You are essentially telling the other person, I believe your feedback is valid and I want to implement it, but I lack the concrete data to do so. Please help me understand by pointing to a reality we can both observe.
It forces a critic to move out of the realm of vague feelings and into the realm of actionable facts, which is the only place true problem solving can actually happen. Could you give me a specific example? I am genuinely writing that down.
It's a lifesaver. It anchors the emotion back to reality.
Definitely.
Now, bringing it back to Sarah's scenario, she has thanked Mr. Evans, validated his logic, and admitted she hadn't weighed the new vendor risk heavily enough.
Right.
Mr. Evans confirms he wants the 10% contingency applied. And Sarah closes the interaction with a phrase the guide highlights as a particularly effective professional idiom. She says, I'll take that on board.
I'll take that on board. It's a very British English phrase, isn't it?
It is, originating from the nautical world, like taking cargo or passengers onto a ship. But in the context of professional communication, it carries a very specific, weighty meaning that is much more powerful than its alternatives.
What's the alternative? Just saying, I hear you.
Think about how dismissive I hear you can sound. It often translates to, I have processed the sound waves coming out of your mouth, and now I would like you to stop talking.
Got it. Message received. Yeah, it can be very cold.
But I'll take that on board signifies active internalization. It means I have heard your point, I have understood its value, and I am physically bringing this advice into my internal mental models to seriously consider and act upon.
It is a real commitment to integration.
Exactly. And Sarah brilliantly extends the power of this phrase by applying it chronologically. She doesn't just say she'll fix the current spreadsheet. She says, I'll take that on board for future proposals too.
Which is the absolute dream scenario for a manager.
It really is. Mr. Evans didn't just fix a single error on a single budget. He improved his employees' entire analytical framework for the rest of her tenure.
Wow.
Sarah demonstrated that she didn't just memorize the correction to survive the meeting, she actually learned the underlying lesson. She took the raw data of the criticism, completely bypassed her ego's defense mechanisms, and integrated it into her professional toolkit.
We have covered an immense amount of psychological and linguistic ground today. So what does this all mean?
It's a lot to process.
If we step back and look at the big picture of this entire communication guide, whether we are analyzing the top-down neurobiology of Sarah's sandwich method, or the horizontal ego-free collaboration of Maya's we language,
Right.
or the incredibly delicate emotional regulation required to receive feedback like Sarah did, the ultimate objective of constructive criticism is remarkably consistent.
The underlying goal is identical across every scenario we've explored.
It is to improve and to grow together.
Yeah.
It's about accepting the fundamental reality that we all have blind spots. We all make mistakes, whether it's a dense summary, a poorly formatted slide deck, or a dangerously lean budget.
Or a very spicy curry.
Or a very spicy curry. And by utilizing these specific intentional linguistic tools, the room for improvement, the subjective, I've noticed that, the pressure releasing just a thought, and the humble, I hadn't considered that, we can navigate these highly sensitive conversations with confidence.
We can bypass the amygdala and speak directly to the prefrontal cortex.
Yes. We can offer our help without destroying our relationships.
I think that perfectly synthesizes the mechanics of everything we've discussed. Yeah. But as we bring this deep dive to a close, I want to challenge you, the listener, to think just a little bit beyond the precise phrases we've learned today.
Oh, let's hear it.
We have spent this entire time analyzing how to perfectly package our words. We've talked about the responsibility of the giver to soften the blow, lower the stakes, and ensure the sandwich has the exact right ratio of praise to critique so the ego feels safe.
Right.
And as a leader or a peer, that is absolutely your responsibility. You should strive to be as skilled and empathetic as Sarah and Maya. But what happens when you are on the receiving end and the person talking to you hasn't read this guide?
When the feedback you are getting is just a complete mess.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What if we trained ourselves to completely detach the message from the delivery?
Oh, that is a massive paradigm shift.
Imagine if you could take a poorly worded, blunt, clumsy piece of criticism from a boss or a colleague. Imagine if they used 0 polite phrases. What if they just bluntly stated the problem with your work?
Okay.
Could you train your mind to strip away your emotional reaction to their bad delivery and just view their words as raw, neutral data?
That requires next-level mental discipline. To not demand that the feedback be wrapped in a beautiful bow before you deign to accept it.
It does, but think about the exponential rate at which you could grow professionally and personally if you didn't need the feedback to be perfectly constructive in order for you to construct something useful out of it.
You take the power back.
Exactly. If you can find the kernel of truth, even in a poorly delivered critique, you become essentially unstoppable. Your personal evolution is no longer bottlenecked by the communication skills of the people around you.
Taking the raw data, no matter how harshly it's served. Because at the end of the day, even if the feedback feels like a mouthful of fire,
Right.
even if they accidentally dumped 2 tablespoons of chili powder into their delivery instead of 2 teaspoons, if you can breathe through that initial burning sensation, you might just realize that the recipe they are trying to hand you is exactly what you need.
Just make sure you have that glass of milk ready.
Keep practicing those communication tools, keep your ego in check, and we'll see you on the next deep dive. Imagine you are sitting around a dinner table. The food is incredible, the lighting is warm, everyone is just relaxed and having a fantastic time.
Oh yeah, the perfect setup.
Right. And then, out of nowhere, someone across the table states an opinion. And I don't mean just a mild preference. I mean an opinion that fundamentally, intensely clashes with your core view of the world. Or, even just your view on a movie, or a political policy, or how to raise kids.
The physiological reaction is almost instantaneous. Before you even consciously register the words, your heart rate spikes, your breathing gets a little shallower, and your stomach just tightens.
That is the exact feeling. You are sitting there with your fork just suspended in midair, suddenly facing the ultimate social dilemma.
It really is a trap.
It is. Because if you speak up and express your actual nuanced opinion, you risk completely ruining the vibe, escalating the tension, and starting a fight. But if you just nod along, swallow your words and let it go, you feel this burning cognitive dissonance.
Right, because every fiber of your being wants to correct the record.
Exactly. It feels like a threat. And the fascinating thing is, your brain is actually treating it like a physical threat, isn't it?
It absolutely is. I mean, when we encounter information that contradicts our deeply held beliefs, the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, fires up in the exact same way it would if you were walking in the woods and saw a bear.
A bear?
Yeah. From an evolutionary standpoint, early humans relied entirely on tribal cohesion for survival. If you disagreed with the tribe, you risked being ostracized.
Which meant wandering the savannah alone.
Which meant death. So our neurobiology is hardwired to view ideological disagreement not as some, intellectual exercise, but as a literal life or death survival scenario.
Which perfectly explains why our natural default in those moments is so binary. The fight or flight response just kicks in.
Right.
And we either submit completely just nodding and saying, sure, yeah, totally, or we go on the attack and say, you are entirely wrong and here are 5 reasons why.
And the problem is, neither of those biological defaults serves us well in a modern boardroom or, at a modern dinner party.
No, not at all. Which is what makes the source material we are diving into today so incredibly compelling.
It really is a goldmine.
On its surface, this is a transcript from an advanced English listening practice series. Specifically, it's part 2 of a Communication Challenges mini-series. It is ostensibly designed to teach language learners how to navigate professional and social friction.
But when you actually read the transcript and you look at the structural mechanics of the dialogue, it is so much more than a vocabulary lesson.
Oh, absolutely.
It is essentially a hacker's manual for bypassing the human brain's threat detection system. It provides the exact linguistic codes you need to express dissent without triggering someone else's amygdala.
And the source uses this brilliant framing device early on. It describes the act of expressing a nuanced, opposing opinion as a verbal tightrope walk. Okay, let's unpack this.
It is an incredibly apt metaphor because it highlights the cognitive load required to pull this off. That middle ground, the space between total submission and total aggression, is extremely narrow.
It's so easy to slip.
Exactly. If you lean too far into absolute honesty without factoring in the other person's ego, you fall off the rope into aggression and they just stop listening.
Right.
But if you lean too far into validating their ego without maintaining the integrity of your own perspective, well, you fall into passivity and your point is totally lost.
You have to find a way to walk straight down the center, balancing your truth with their psychological safety.
Yes.
And today, we are going to extract the exact techniques from this source material to help you walk that tightrope. We're going to examine 3 distinct escalating scenarios from the transcript.
Escalating is the key word there.
Definitely. We'll be dissecting the psychology behind the specific phrases used and exploring why our brains react to them the way they do. Let's start by looking at a relatively low-stakes environment.
Sounds good.
We are going to look at the anatomy of partial agreement, how to find common ground when you fundamentally disagree with someone's assessment of a shared experience.
The setting the source provides for this first scenario is a book club, which is honestly the perfect laboratory for testing this out.
Because the stakes are low.
Right. The stakes are low in terms of literal survival, but the emotional investment is incredibly high.
Oh, people get very defensive over books. So we have 2 characters in the transcripts, Liam and Chloe. Liam has just finished the book they're discussing, and his reaction is incredibly visceral.
Very intense.
He tells Chloe that it had the most perfect, heartwarming ending. He praises the author for tying up all the loose ends, and he explicitly states that he closed the book with a huge smile on his face.
He has enmeshed his current emotional state with the quality of the book.
It's a great way to put it.
Yeah, for Liam, the book isn't just an object of critique right now. It is the actual source of his joy.
And then there's Chloe. Chloe's experience was the polar opposite. She thought the ending was just okay. She found it too neat, highly unrealistic, and essentially a narrative cop-out.
So they are in completely different realities.
Exactly. So Chloe is holding that suspended fork at the dinner table. She is looking at Liam, who is just radiating joy, and she has to figure out how to introduce her completely contradictory experience.
It's like diffusing a small bomb.
It is, because if she just leads with her truth and says, "Are you kidding? That ending was a total cop-out," she isn't just attacking the book.
No, she is attacking his joy.
Right. She is making him feel naive for enjoying something so unrealistic.
And that is a surefire way to trigger the defensive response we were just talking about. But Chloe bypasses it completely. Her opening move in the transcript is brilliant in its restraint.
What does she do?
She doesn't state her opinion at all. She simply says, "I can see why you'd feel that way."
I can see why you'd feel that way. Let's pause on that phrase, because on the surface, that can easily sound like a massive brush-off.
It really can.
It can sound so patronizing.
Yeah.
You know, like a parent humoring a toddler. "Oh, I see why you'd feel that way about the monster under the bed."
It definitely can. And the difference lies entirely in vocal tone and intentionality. If delivered with a sigh or a dismissive wave, yes, it is absolutely patronizing.
Right, it's all in the delivery.
But when delivered with genuine reflection, it accomplishes something crucial. It separates emotional validation from cognitive agreement.
Okay, wait, explain that difference.
Sure. So Chloe is not saying, "I agree that the book was a masterpiece." She is saying, based on the parameters you just laid out, that you value heartwarming conclusions and narrative closure, your emotional reaction is entirely logical.
Oh, wow. So she is validating his internal logic system without endorsing the external object.
Exactly.
The source also highlights a variation of this from its vocabulary preview.
Yeah.
See where you're coming from. I find the spatial metaphor in that phrase really interesting.
Oh, the spatial metaphor is key.
It isn't just saying "I understand." It is acknowledging that the other person arrives at their conclusion through a specific journey.
Yeah.
Or essentially says, "I recognize the path you walked to get to that opinion, even if I am standing on a completely different hill."
And by establishing that shared reality, you neutralize the perceived threat. Liam's brain receives a very clear signal.
Which is?
She understands my logic. Therefore, she is not an enemy attacking my intellect. Only after that baseline of psychological safety is established does Chloe begin to introduce her dissent.
And the source points out the specific linguistic toolkit she uses to do this. She starts setting boundaries with phrases like, I'm with you up to a point, and later, to a certain extent, I agree.
I love those phrases.
I'm with you up to a point. It continues that spatial metaphor perfectly. You are walking down the path together, but you are planting a flag to indicate exactly where your paths diverge.
It acts as a conversational shock absorber. If Chloe just pivoted immediately from I see why you liked it to but it was incredibly unrealistic, the sudden shift would still cause whiplash.
It would be too jarring.
Exactly. By saying up to a point, she is managing his expectations. She is signaling that a critique is coming, which gives his brain a millisecond to prepare for it, rather than just ambushing him with negativity.
It is the ultimate anti-ambush technique. And when she finally does deliver the critique, the structural mechanics of her sentence are fascinating.
They really are.
The source highlights a specific framework she uses. While it's true, I also think structure. Her exact phrasing in the transcript is, while it's true that all the loose ends were tied up, I also think it felt a little unrealistic.
What's fascinating here is the order of the clauses in that sentence. It is not accidental. It is deeply rooted in how the brain processes sequential information.
Right, because if she just spoke naturally, without thinking about it, she might say, I think it felt unrealistic, even though the loose ends were tied up.
Which means the same thing.
The meaning is identical. The semantic value of the sentence hasn't changed at all. But if she leads with, I think it felt unrealistic, the entire conversation probably derails right there, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And that happens because of a cognitive phenomenon known as anchoring bias.
Anchoring bias.
Yes. The human brain heavily weights the very first piece of information it receives. If the first half of your sentence is a negative critique, it was unrealistic, you drop a massive negative anchor.
And the listener's amygdala just flares right up.
Exactly. And they immediately start formulating their counter-argument. By the time you get to the conciliatory second half of your sentence, even though the loose ends were tied up, they literally aren't listening anymore.
Wow.
They have gone deaf to the positive concession because they are too busy defending themselves against that opening attack.
So that while it's true, I also think structure forces you to reverse that anchor.
Yeah.
You are intentionally front-loading the sentence with a shared objective reality.
You're leading with the good stuff.
While it's true that all the loose ends were tied up, you are handing them a gift right out of the gate. You are agreeing on a factual element of the book.
And because you have established that agreement, when the subjective critique arrives in the second clause, I also think it felt a little unrealistic. It is processed not as an attack, but as a nuanced addition to the shared reality.
It frames your dissent as intelligent observation rather than petty hatred. You sound like a thoughtful critic rather than just a contrarian trying to rain on their parade.
Exactly.
And the effectiveness of this is proven by Liam's reaction in the source transcript. He doesn't get defensive. He doesn't start listing reasons why the realism of the book is actually completely valid.
He does the opposite.
He actually pauses, absorbs her point, and says, you've got a point there.
Yeah.
He openly admits that the sudden inheritance at the end of the story was a convenient plot device.
He concedes the point because his ego wasn't tied up in defending it. Chloe gave him permission to agree with her critique without having to abandon his own positive experience of the book.
That is a massive takeaway for anyone listening who's navigating a casual debate. If you want your critique to actually penetrate someone's awareness, you have to prove that you have fully absorbed their praise first.
You really do.
You have to find that sliver of common ground, validate their logic, and use structure to introduce your nuance gently.
It works beautifully when the stakes are simply about the aesthetic quality of a novel, but the mechanics change drastically when the environment changes.
Which brings us to the second scenario in the transcript, where the stakes escalate exponentially. We are moving from a low-stakes book club into a high-pressure professional environment.
A whole different ballgame.
Completely. This is where partial agreement often isn't enough, and you have to firmly stand your ground without torpedoing your own career. Let's look at how to navigate professional disagreement.
The source drops us into a marketing meeting. The manager, David, is pitching a radical pivot in strategy. He wants to cut the existing budget for community management completely and funnel every single dollar into high-profile influencer campaigns.
A huge risk.
His argument is that it will double their market reach.
And the transcript notes a very specific, visceral detail. After David pitches this aggressive strategy, there is complete silence in the room.
Oof. We all know that silence.
Anyone who has ever worked in a corporate environment knows exactly what that silence sounds like. It is heavy. It is the sound of an entire team instantly realizing that the boss's idea is incredibly dangerous.
But everyone is just running a frantic mental calculus to decide if speaking up is worth the career risk.
Exactly. It is a classic manifestation of a lack of psychological safety. The hierarchy in the room is suppressing honest feedback. But Maya, one of the team members, decides she has to break the silence.
She's brave.
She recognizes that abandoning their core user base to chase influencers is going to damage the brand long term. Her challenge is immense. She has to contradict the person who signs her paychecks in front of the entire team without sounding insubordinate or disrespectful.
And Maya's opening tactic is highly strategic. She starts by acknowledging the intention behind the idea, saying, "I appreciate the bold thinking."
A nice cushion.
But then she uses a very specific phrase to introduce her dissent. She says, "I have a slightly different take on this."
I have a slightly different take on this. The social function of the word take in that sentence is doing an incredible amount of heavy lifting, isn't it?
It really is. In a corporate environment, arguments often become battles over objective reality. People argue over whose data is right and whose projections are accurate.
Right, it gets very zero-sum.
When Maya frames her disagreement as a take, she is intentionally removing the debate from the realm of objective fact and placing it into the realm of subjective interpretation.
She is taking the ego completely out of the room. She isn't standing up and saying, "Your numbers are wrong, David, and your strategy is flawed."
Because that would be an attack.
That would force him to defend his competence in front of his subordinates. By saying, "I have a slightly different take," she implies, we are both looking at the exact same data, but the lens through which I am viewing it is yielding a different picture.
It creates a buffer. It allows David to listen to her alternative perspective without feeling like his authority or his intelligence is being publicly undermined.
It reminds me of the second softener she uses immediately after, which the source also highlights. She says, "I'm not sure I see it the same way in terms of risk."
Another great phrase.
Using I statements instead of you statements is a well-known conflict resolution tactic, but seeing it applied here is striking. "I'm not sure I see it the same way." Takes ownership of the disconnect. Contrast that with, "You aren't seeing the risk here."
Huge difference. One is an invitation to elaborate. The other is an accusation of blindness. By taking ownership of the uncertainty, Maya makes it safe for David to engage.
But eventually, the softeners have to give way to actual concrete disagreement. Maya has to draw a line in the sand. And this is where the transcript introduces a phrase that carries a lot of cultural baggage.
Oh, yes.
Maya says, "With all due respect, I think it's a gamble that could backfire badly." Now wait, I've tried using "with all due respect" in professional settings, and I've seen it backfire spectacularly.
It's a dangerous one.
In modern parlance, it is almost entirely used as a sarcastic precursor to a massive insult. People say "with all due respect" right before they tell you your idea is garbage.
Yep. It's a classic setup for a takedown.
So if it is such a loaded, potentially inflammatory phrase, why is it being taught as a tool for polite professional disagreement?
You are identifying a very real tension in how language evolves. You are right that in casual or cynical environments, it has been heavily weaponized. If delivered with a clipped tone or an eye roll, it is absolutely an insult.
Yeah, tone is everything.
But in formal, high-stakes professional English, it retains a very specific and vital function. It acts as an explicit, formal warning signal. Think of it as a yellow traffic light in the conversation.
A yellow light, so it is signaling that a sudden stop is coming.
Exactly. When Maya says, "with all due respect," she is formally pausing the flow of the meeting. She is explicitly acknowledging the power dynamic, offering the due respect owed to his position as the manager, while simultaneously asserting her professional obligation to voice a severe contradiction.
It tells the listener, "I am about to say something difficult, but I am doing it within the bounds of professional protocol."
Precisely. It is a way of saying, "I recognize your authority, but my expertise compels me to disagree." It provides a formal wrapper for the dissent, and she pairs it immediately with the most definitive statement in the transcript, "Respectfully, I disagree."
Respectfully, I disagree. It is a brilliant pairing of words.
It really balances the scale.
Disagree is a hard, uncompromising verb. There is no ambiguity there. She's putting her opposition on the record. But by modifying it with respectfully, she softens the blow just enough to keep it professional.
But if she stopped there, she would just be the person shooting down the boss's idea.
Exactly. I had a manager once who used to say, "Don't bring me a problem unless you are also bringing me a solution." If Maya just says, I disagree, this is a gamble, and then sits back down, she becomes an obstacle.
And that is the most crucial part of Maya's strategy. She doesn't just dismantle David's idea. She immediately pivots into building a new one.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
She says another way to look at it could be, and she offers a concrete compromise. She says, perhaps we could pilot a smaller influencer campaign first, alongside our community management.
She builds him a golden bridge to retreat across. She doesn't demand he abandon his vision entirely, she just offers a safer, scaled-down path to test it.
From a neurochemical standpoint, when you shoot down an idea, you are creating a stress response. Cortisol levels rise in the room.
Nobody likes being told no.
Right. But the moment you introduce a new puzzle to solve, what if we pilot a smaller campaign? You shift the brain's focus from defending the ego to active problem solving. You engage the prefrontal cortex.
Which is the logical part of the brain.
Yes. By offering a constructive alternative, Maya proves that her disagreement is rooted in a desire to help the company succeed, not a desire to undermine David's leadership.
So the blueprint for navigating a boardroom disagreement is super clear. You soften the ego blow by framing your dissent as a subjective take. You use formal markers like, with all due respect, to acknowledge hierarchy when dropping a hard truth. And always, without exception, immediately pivot into a constructive alternative to prove you are a collaborative problem solver. It is a masterful sequence.
But what happens when you aren't dealing with rational actors in a professional setting? What happens when you are confronted with an opinion that is completely immune to logic, nuance, or constructive alternatives?
This is where the transcript enters its most fascinating territory. We've covered how to find common ground, and we've covered how to firmly assert an opposing professional view. But our third scenario introduces the stealth strategy.
The stealth strategy.
What to do when stating your opinion will instantly shut down the conversation entirely.
This requires a completely different set of linguistic tools.
The source sets up a conversation about a highly polarizing local issue. Two friends, Tom and Sarah, are discussing a controversial new policy to ban cars from the city center, creating a pedestrian-only zone.
A classic local town debate.
And Tom does not open the conversation with nuance. He uses extreme, black and white, highly emotional language. He declares that the policy is a complete disaster and claims it will kill all the local businesses.
He is using absolute hyperbole, complete disaster, kill all businesses. Language like that is functionally designed to shut down debate. It is a verbal fortress.
He isn't looking for a discussion.
No, he is looking for submission or a fight.
When someone comes at you with that level of absolutism, the visceral instinct is to push back with equal force. If someone screams, it will kill businesses, your brain wants to scream back, no, it won't. Pedestrian zones actually increase foot traffic by 20%.
We want to hit them with the data.
You want to barrage them with data and facts to prove their hyperbole wrong.
But doing so triggers what psychologists call the backfire effect.
The backfire effect.
Yes. When a deeply entrenched, emotionally driven belief is challenged with contradictory evidence, the person doesn't change their mind. Instead, their brain perceives the contradictory evidence as an attack, and they actually double down on their original belief.
Oh, so they dig their heels in.
They become even more convinced they are right. Throwing facts at emotional hyperbole is literally like throwing gasoline on a fire.
Which makes Sarah's approach in this scenario look like absolute genius.
Yeah.
The source notes a stunning detail about Sarah's half of the dialogue. Throughout the entire conversation with Tom, she never once states her own opinion on the car-free city center.
She completely withholds her own viewpoint. She never says she agrees with the policy, and she never tells him he is wrong.
How do you even have a conversation about a controversial topic without expressing your stance? It seems impossible.
She treats the conversation not as a debate to be won, but as a system to be debugged.
Oh, I like that.
When software is glitching, you don't yell at the screen. You look at the source code to see where the error is occurring. Sarah uses open-ended, non-threatening probing to gently force Tom to look at his own source code.
So how does she do that when he's yelling about a disaster?
When he drops the complete disaster hyperbole, her immediate response is, a lot of people seem worried about that. What leads you to that conclusion specifically?
Let's unpack the phrasing there, because what leads you to that conclusion is so much more sophisticated than just asking, why do you think that?
Vastly different.
When I hear why do you think that, it instantly feels like an interrogation.
Asking why directly challenges a person's internal logic and their identity. It demands that they defend themselves. It essentially says, Justify your irrational behavior.
Nobody wants to feel like you're on the witness stand.
Exactly. But asking what leads you to that conclusion shifts the focus entirely. It externalizes the blame. It suggests that Tom is a rational person who is simply following a trail of external evidence.
So it's not his fault, it's the evidence's fault.
Right. Sarah is standing beside him, looking out at the evidence and politely asking, "Can you show me the map you used to arrive at this destination?"
And it forces him out of his emotional brain and into his analytical brain. He can't just keep yelling disaster. He actually has to articulate a mechanism.
He has to build the map.
And in the transcript, he does. He tells her that if people can't drive into the center, they won't want to deal with the hassle of public transport, so they will take their money to out-of-town malls where parking is free. He finally provides a tangible, testable hypothesis.
And the moment he provides that tangible argument, Sarah deploys one of the most effective tools in active listening, the paraphrasing technique.
Paraphrasing.
She says, "So, if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying that the main issue is convenience and access for shoppers."
I use this technique constantly, and it is almost magical how well it works to de-escalate tension. Why does having your own words repeated back to you calm you down so much?
It addresses a fundamental human need, the need to be witnessed and understood. When Tom hears Sarah accurately summarize his core concern without mocking it, his nervous system relaxes. He feels heard.
The threat level drops.
But strategically, Sarah is doing something incredibly clever here. She is shrinking the target.
Right. She is taking this massive apocalyptic claim. The city center is a complete disaster, and she is putting a very tight fence around it. She's narrowing it down to a single debatable metric: convenience and access for shoppers.
She is defining the scope of the problem. And once the problem is defined and manageable, she starts gently testing its structural integrity.
She uses phrases that expose his blind spots without ever sounding accusatory.
Exactly.
The source highlights two brilliant examples. Help me understand, and I'm curious about the whatever part.
Those phrases are pure gold.
She applies this specifically to the geography of the town. She asks, help me understand the impact on shops that don't rely on shoppers with cars, like the ones near the train station.
It's so subtle.
The phrasing is so deferential. She doesn't say, you completely forgot about the train station. Your argument makes no sense. She says, help me understand. She positions herself as the confused student asking the expert for clarification.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this exploits a cognitive bias known as the illusion of explanatory depth.
The illusion of explanatory depth.
Yes. We all believe we understand complex systems like the economy or urban zoning, or even how a toilet works much better than we actually do.
Until we try to fix the toilet.
Right. It isn't until someone politely asks us to explain the step-by-step mechanics of the system that we realize how shallow our understanding actually is.
Oh, that makes total sense.
By asking Tom to walk me through your thinking regarding the shops near the train station or how the policy might affect air quality and the pedestrian experience, Sarah is forcing him to confront the limits of his own knowledge.
She is literally making him argue the counterpoints to his own argument.
Yes, she is.
She asks about air quality. And because he wants to appear reasonable in the face of her calm curiosity, he literally has to admit, well, I suppose the air would be cleaner, which is good.
He's debating himself.
And regarding the shops by the station, he concedes, I hadn't really thought about them.
She introduces nuance into his worldview without ever once providing a fact of her own. She allows him to discover the nuance himself, which means he doesn't have to defend an ego against her.
By the end of the conversation in the transcript, the source notes that Tom still holds his core belief. He still thinks the economic impact on car-dependent shops is the biggest issue.
He didn't totally slip.
But the temperature of his opinion has completely changed. The hyperbole is gone. He is no longer screaming about a complete disaster. He is recognizing that it is a complex issue with trade-offs.
That's a massive win.
And Sarah achieved that monumental shift in his perspective simply by acting as a mirror.
It represents the absolute highest level of conversational intelligence. When faced with an absolute immovable opinion, trying to bulldoze it with facts will only reinforce the walls.
It just makes the walls thicker.
But if you ask the right questions, if you express genuine strategic curiosity, you can guide the person to dismantle their own walls from the inside out.
So what does this all mean? As we pull all of these threads together, what is the ultimate lesson hiding inside this advanced English transcript?
It applies everywhere.
Whether you are navigating a casual debate about a novel at a book club, presenting a counter strategy to your boss in a high-stakes marketing meeting, or trying to de-escalate a heated political argument with a friend, the core mechanism remains the same.
Masterful communication is never about brute force. It is never about proving your intellectual superiority or battering someone into submission with an avalanche of facts.
Facts don't win hearts.
No, because those tactics trigger the amygdala, raise cortisol levels, and guarantee that the other person will stop listening to you.
True influence relies entirely on your ability to navigate the ego. It is about doing the heavy lifting of validating someone's emotional reality before you ever attempt to challenge their cognitive conclusions.
Validation is the prerequisite to persuasion.
It is recognizing that the structure of your sentences matters just as much as the content. That front-loading a shared truth, using the while it's true, I also think framework can bypass the brain's anchoring bias.
It is about possessing the situational awareness to use formal markers, like with all due respect, to signal a pause in the hierarchy, and the strategic foresight to always pair your professional dissent with a constructive, ego-saving alternative.
And sometimes, when the tension is at its absolute peak, it is having the discipline to realize that your opinion doesn't need to be stated at all.
That's the hardest part.
So here is our challenge to you for the week ahead. Take the specific linguistic tools we have dissected today and run a real-world experiment. The next time you feel that physical tightening in your stomach because someone says something you fundamentally disagree with, resist the urge to punch back.
Just take a breath.
Instead, test out these phrases. Say, "I see where you're coming from," and watch how their posture physically relaxes. Frame your disagreement as a slightly different take and see how the defensive barriers lower.
It really works.
Or, if the opinion is extreme, try to shrink the target by asking, what leads you to that conclusion specifically?
Observe how the dynamics of the interaction shift when you prioritize psychological safety over the need to be right. You will likely find that people are infinitely more receptive to your perspective when they don't feel like they are under attack.
It changes everything. And as we conclude this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over.
Let's hear it.
We spend a tremendous amount of our energy in our lives obsessing over how to perfectly articulate our opinions. We polish our arguments, we gather our facts, and we refine our phrasing because we want to feel heard.
We all want to be right.
We want to leave our mark on a conversation and prove that our view of the world is valid. But what if that instinct is actually limiting our influence?
Oh, that's a wild thought.
What if the true pinnacle of conversational power doesn't come from your ability to express your opinion brilliantly? What if ultimate power is the ability to withhold your own viewpoint entirely?
A total paradigm shift.
Imagine navigating the most heated, high-stakes conflicts in your life, not by balancing your heavy opinion against theirs, but by remaining completely unburdened. Imagine simply acting as a perfectly angled mirror, using carefully crafted, deeply curious questions to guide the other person until they gently, inevitably dismantle their own absolute certainty. Now that is a truly staggering kind of power.